Students, can you go in your business books? Theme 3 books, open them up to page 11 and have a go at answering what those objectives might be. So it says might be appropriate in the situations below. You've got 6 situations there. It may be that more than one objective is appropriate. Might be that you think none of the objectives are appropriate, but have a little look at those different situations. You can do it in pencil first, so just cross out there's enough space in your book to do this. I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes to do that. And then we'll see what you've came up with. Okay, you've had a little bit of time to think about the answers to those questions. The other little starter that you could have looked at there as well was what factors increased demand for a good or service. We'll go through both of those in a second. Thinking about the factors that affect demand: lower price complements, higher priced substitutes, the lower market price from a shift outwards in supply, advertising, lower income tax or higher incomes for normal goods, so goods where they are responsive or unresponsive to changes in income, and a rising population. Okay, so hello students. Welcome to the lesson. You may remind me that I said I was not going to be off this year. Well, I'm not off. I'm in the building. I'm just not able to lead the lesson, so you have virtual Aaron this afternoon. We're going to quickly go through a little recap of the last lesson, which is business objectives. I'm going to give you a few reminders for things that you should be doing during the week, which we really need to get into the habit of doing because we didn't do them to the right time in the first week. We're then going to look a little bit at a topic called the principal agent problem, and then we're also going to look at business growth in terms of integration and organic and inorganic growth. If you just want to have a look at the board there, so depending on what answers you came up with, there was a few different possible solutions. Being able to take over the rival could be Profit Max, because if you've got over 70% of the market share, you're effectively now a monopoly. And you'd be able to put your prices up and make the greatest profit possible. Government coming under pressure from the media about high energy prices, well, this would be something that would drive more ethical behaviour. So you could say it would be satisficing, so businesses reducing their profits to pass some of those cost savings on to customers. But it could also be a switch to a welfare maximisation or an allocative efficiency objective for the business. If you can just note these down in your books, remember it's page 11. So just cross out if you've got any incorrect answers for this, or add down the answers that we're going through here. So annual general meeting, you've decided you're going to increase your own pay by 50%, but not enough shareholders have turned up to vote that down. So it's either that you are going along a revenue max strategy to gain that pay in the first place, but it could also just be satisficing in terms of just making small profits. So you're not maximising your profits, you're making just enough to stay in business, but the small profits is satisficing. Managing director looking for a new job, well, any one of those policies would make your CV look better. You might want your CV to look better from selling a lot and having great market share. You might want your CV to look better from revenue maximisation linked into your share price. But you might also want profit maximisation because that would give a significant dividend to your shareholders. Recession would be survival, and new competitor entering the market depends if you're going to be aggressive or shrink your business, so it could be a sales max if you're going to be an aggressive response, but it could also be survival if you're just going to shrink your business. So that is a little quick recap of the initial activity that I just shared with you there. Let's have a quick look at the PowerPoint for this lesson. So first little section of the lesson, we're going to discuss the extent to which profit maximisation is the main objective of all businesses. That was our question from the first lesson. We are going to describe what is meant by the principal agent problem. We will potentially solve that problem, and then we'll look at how businesses grow and the reasons for their growth. Just a reminder that the three things we need to start getting into the habit of doing between lessons. The first activity is going to be read up. That's your reading activity, and if you haven't submitted that, you need to take a photo of that very quickly and submit that to me. The write up is the essay practice. So this was the thing that we did in the booklet, and you will do that in your purple book from this week going forwards. You should all have a purple book on your tables. Put your name on it. This is your homework book. It will come back with you next week. And the warm-up part is reading ahead in the lesson. So you've got all of the booklets you need. You should be reading ahead. Today's lesson was about business growth. You should have had a little look at that before the lesson. And across the week, there's 2 knowledge checks to check what you've done in the week to make sure that you're improving on knowledge, but also recapping what we have done in the past. A little reminder, so another thing that you need to submit onto the team site is those questions around Vespa, and this will form a part of your first one-to-one with me. And that is your week for C block. So you should have your lesson on Wednesday, morning and afternoon. You should have done the first knowledge check and the reading task by the weekend. By the end of the weekend, knowledge check 2 and your essay, and then you warm up for the following lesson on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday by reading ahead in the book, and that should give you your 5 hours of practice. So this little section is going to be around looking at this exam question. So this is the one that we looked at last week. Discuss the extent to which profit maximisation is the main objective of all businesses. And we said that it would be a definition. Good SAO starts off with a definition and an application to a specific type of business. We said the two sides were why the business would want profit maximisation, and we said this was more a long-term or the time strategy, and why they might not, or the situation in which they might not in the short term. And if it was an essay question, we'd need an evaluative conclusion around a judgment. So we noted that the word "or" would give us a good key judgment to make there around that. So I'm going to give you a little task now. It's going to hopefully just take about 5 minutes or so to write up. And what I would like you to do is to plan out this question. So get your notebooks, wherever you're going to write this up. If you want to, you could write this in the back of your purple book. In fact, no, that's the better idea. So go to the very back page of your purple book. And in the back page, you're going to just briefly do 2 paragraphs to answer this question. And the way this will be structured is start off with that sentence. So it is rational for businesses to profit maximise in the long term because you need to give a reason why the profits are needed for a business. Apply this to an example, which businesses need profits. Just choose a business, any business, and explain the specific benefit of those profits to the owners or the shareholders. So we're talking about private sector businesses here. Opposite side, however, in the short term, it might be more appropriate to choose an objective. You could go for sales maximisation, revenue maximisation, survival, satisfying welfare. It's up to you. But again, apply that to the business that you've looked at. So give examples, apply it to context, explain the benefits of adopting this. And the last part there is a challenge if you're a fast writer. So if you're going to write fast and you're going to get through this quite quickly, you could write up a conclusion. So the extent to which they can depends upon, and I'm suggesting their market share. So see if you could have a conclusion, something around market share, that would tell you that the business is more or less able to profit maximise. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes initially to write this up. Try and at least get the paragraph 4 quite detailed. If you get time, do the paragraph against. Should have time to do that. If you do write quickly, then have a little go at the conclusion. And I'll show you a model and stand about 5 minutes time. Okay, students, remember, you've got case for. If you've done that, case against, why there'll be another objective, think of the situation, apply it to the business. If you are fast writing and you've done both of those things, remember to have a go at a conclusion. The extent to which the business can profit maximise depends upon market share because, finish that paragraph. Okay, that's time up. Let's have a look at an example answer. So put your pens down for a second. But once we've gone through this, then make amendments to your booklets. There should be a purple pen on every desk for you to use to do this. If you've used the purple pen, use a different coloured pen to make your improvements. So just so it's obvious where you made an improvement. Don't try and copy this all out. The example answer, just make some notes. So it could be the things that I put in bold, but it could also just be a few little notes around the outside of your answer to improve it. And I will save the second answer onto the team site. So in the long term, profit maximisation is the rational behaviour of all firms. Even if they are unable to, they will still be willing. So here's a key start part. Profits will allow a business to gain reward for their investment. So specifically linking back to their remuneration in the form of dividends. So keyword there, dividends, they come from profits. And historically, oil companies, applying it to a market, paid large dividends from large profits. If profits are retained, again, key term, retained, it allows investment, key term, which can allow a business to grow further. Any business that continually makes a loss will go out of business. So again, loss out of business. Just make some notes if you need to improve on your essay. However, in the short term, another objective may be appropriate. In times of recession, such as the Great Recession of 2008, highlighted key application there, banks, application to the market, had to focus on survival, specific key term, and reduce the scale of their operation. Again, key term, scale of operation. Rates were lowered to maintain customers, and staff were laid off. So again, key term there. This allowed them to at least cover their costs and continue to operate until the economy picked up. So if you've missed some key parts there, then think about how you could add to those. I'm going to give you an even better version of the answer. So this is kind of a B version of the answer. I'm going to give you an A grade. I'm not going to put the A grade on here for long, but it will be saved into the team site for this topic. So you'll be able to see that a bit later. So the better A grade answer, so key definition. And the reason this is A grade, some of these topics we haven't done yet. We haven't done some of the definitions. So I'm giving you something you haven't seen yet. Profit maximisation is when a firm maximises revenue in relation to minimising its costs. All technology firms need this to be their main objective, as in the long run, if total cost is greater than total revenue, they will make a loss leading to bankruptcy. Better key term, more specific definition, total cost greater than total revenue, more specific definition, maximises revenue, minimising costs. However, most technology firms, such as Facebook, have very little revenue initially as the business grows and they try to gain advertising revenues. So really specific context there in terms of the business reason for growing. Costs are higher in the short term as they haven't gained economies of scale. Key term, topic we haven't covered yet. Survival may be more appropriate where the business makes normal profit, costs equaling revenue, or average cost equal average revenue, trying to stay in the market. So again, more specific key terms, more detailed context. And the extent to which technology firms can profit maximise depends upon their market share. If they can gain market share greater than 25%, specific definition, they will have more potential to increase prices and increase revenue in relation to costs. So again, really specific, basically saying if you're a big firm, you can profit maximise. It's going to be harder if you're a small firm competing in your market. So that was just a little application of the question that we looked at last week, and just getting that structure of essays to become second nature to us. Anyone see a familiar face? Have a little look. It's not me. It's Freddie. Have a look down the front there. Freddie Keynes. And do you know why Freddie Keynes is doing the Great North Run? Because what Freddie Keynes loves is the long run. Ha ha ha! It's an economic joke. So two little situations here, just for you to think about for a minute. Brexit vote happens, pound devalues 30%, which equals a 30% increase in import costs. Why in the short term would a business not want to increase their prices, even if their costs have gone up? Second situation, a competitor enters your market and begins a price war. Why in the short term would you not want to put your prices down? So both of these, Freddie Keynes loves the long run, but we're just looking at this from the short run. Why would you not want to increase your prices when your costs have gone up? And why might you not want to reduce your prices when competitors enter your market? You can use your whiteboards to think of some ideas. I'll give you a minute to think about that, and then we'll come up with some ideas together. So thinking about what the possible answers could be. In the short run, when your costs go up, what you might not want to do is to put your prices up, so they stay the same for a number of reasons. And one of those could be is that you don't want to lose customers if your customers are price sensitive, so if the PD is greater than, less than or equal to -1, then you potentially going to have customers quite responsive to price changes. So you might just accept lower profits in the short term, and that could be because your market is very competitive. In terms of your not entering a price war, so your competitor puts their price down and you keep your price the same, it could be that you're in an inelastic market. So the PD is -0.5 or something like that, but it's inelastic and the consumers aren't responsive. It could also be that you don't want customers to think that your quality is falling, so maybe that there is part of your price which infers quality, and you don't want them to think that you have a low quality good or service. It could also be that you have a lot of profits retained and you don't need to enter into a price war. So different reasons looking at things from the short-term perspective rather than a long-term perspective. Looking back at the presentation then, what I'd like you to go to is you go back to your booklet and you're going to go to page 12. So just the next page along, page 12, and at the top it says, what is the principal agent problem? What you have is some examples of the principal agent problem, but just before we look at those, just pause for a second. I just want you in your own heads think about answers to these questions. So have you ever paid someone for something, a good or a service, and felt that you were ripped off, or that someone overcharged you for it? What was it and how did it happen? Did you get any compensation? Did you get your money back? And why do you think it happened? So just in your own heads, reflect on your own lives, on your own experiences of purchasing goods or services. Have you ever paid someone for something and you thought you were ripped off or overcharged? What was it? How did it happen? And were you able to get some kind of compensation or your money back? And why do you think that happened? What were the incentives that were going on that led to that? Just think about that for 30 seconds. Okay. So you might have got an example of a product that you bought on the internet that had a good review, turned out it wasn't very good and you ended up overpaying for it. It might have been a concert ticket that you bought and the concert wasn't as good as you thought it was going to be. It could be that you went to the dentist and the dentist told you that you needed a filling and you didn't, and you ended up paying for a filling. So lots of different examples there. What I'd like you to do now, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to read through just have a read of that section on page 12. So what would you say, once you've read through it, is the definition for the principal agent problem? Think about the negatives of the problem, and when you look through the examples there, have a think about who the principal and who the agent is within each of those examples. So have a little read through, definition of the principal agent problem, explain the negatives of the problem, and then you've got two different examples. Who are the principal, who are the agent in those problems? I'll give you about 7 or 8 minutes for this, and then we'll go through some potential answers. Okay, so principal agent problem is the divorce of ownership between shareholders and managers. And what that means is that they have conflicting objectives. So that conflicting objectives is the key problem here. And that is because the CEOs or the managers are focusing on revenue max for their bonuses, and the shareholders would prefer profit max, as this will maximise their dividend. So there's a conflict there because this will reduce. So revenue max is also an example of satisficing. It is making some profits, but not the maximum profit. So that creates a problem. And when you have these conflicting objectives or conflicting incentives, then this leads to problems within the business. If you can just take down some notes in your books, somewhere on that page, page 12, maybe in the top left-hand corner, are some notes next to principal agent examples of that, the key part being that, the divorce of ownership and the conflicting objectives. In terms of the principals and the agents in the example there, so in the PPI scandal, it was CEOs of the banks that were the agents and the principal were the shareholders. In the financial crisis, same kind of thing, in terms of banks being bailed out. So the incentive compatibility was firms doing things that would lead to the businesses going bankrupt. So not just focusing on revenue maximising, but doing some extremely risky activity that almost bankrupted the whole of the economy. In terms of other examples, so those are kind of significant examples within what we've looked at. You have an agent could be a dentist, and the principal is you, and you want healthy teeth, but the dentist wants a higher income, and their incentives to give you too much treatment. So that's a principal agent problem. They should be acting in your best interests, but they're acting in their own, and that means that you spend too much on dentistry and you end up with things you do not need in your mouth. In terms of divorce of ownership, another example here would be the PPI scandal. If you remember this advert on TV, Arnie trying to get people to have PPI claims. The PPI scandal was linked to kind of some of the subprime examples. So banks behaving irresponsibly and creating issues in the economy. And if you had Chris Buck as your business studies teacher last year, or your business studies teacher this year, ask him about his role in the PPI scandal and how he was part of the principal agent problem. So if you go to the next page, I'll save that for next week. We'll skip that for a second. I'll have a little pause now. So very quickly, I'll just pause for a second. Remember we said this is a long period of time in the afternoon. So what I'd like you to do is just stand up out of your seats for a second. And stand on your tiptoes, or just have a little stamp on the floor, stretch your legs, stretch your arms, just move around a little bit. You've been sitting for a period of time. Let's wake ourselves up a little bit, get the blood flowing. And then if you can sit back down. And let's look at the next part of the lesson. So just very quickly on your whiteboards, you have a number of logos there. Do you know the logo? And do you know whether they're a big or a small company? So I'll give you about a minute or two. Just a quick look at those logos. Do you know what they represent? Do you know whether they're big or small companies? Just have a little think. So top left, you have the Sage in Gateshead, Newcastle University, Nestle, big food conglomerate, NHS, missing the N and the H&S, ARM, ERM, which is very pertinent because potentially it's going to get bought out by a big American company, Nvidia, and was bought out by a Japanese company, SoftBank, and it was one of the discounts that Brexit gave businesses around the as it devalued the pound and gave them a very nice discount on British businesses. Longhorns restaurant Newcastle on the left, Unilever, again, big Anglo-Dutch conglomerate, one of the biggest companies in the UK, BBC, coffee, I think it's the Pink Lane coffee shop in Newcastle, Renault, Armani, Phoenix, Lane 7 just around the corner, OCC, small coffee company in Newcastle, Vodafone, massive global telecoms company, and Oxfam. So just a little refresher there on the different logos. Just a quick something for you to think about. Where do you think big and small businesses go? So of those businesses, do you think that big businesses make large profits, big businesses make small profits, small businesses make large profits, or small businesses make small profits? Just think where you might put those businesses you've just seen. So just a few examples from those businesses. Sage Gateshead doesn't make any profit, it's a not-for-profit company, has 80 full-time staff, market share, one of 6 large concert venues in Newcastle, so not huge, not tiny either. Unilever profits 7.5 billion. That's profits, not revenue, so revenue's vastly larger than that. 172,000 employees globally, and it's the world's 3rd largest consumer goods company. So Procter & Gamble and Nestle are the other big consumer goods companies. Newcastle University, again, doesn't make any profits, but it has an income of about 62 million, and has 2,000 academic staff, 1,500 admin staff, and it's one of 2 large universities in Newcastle. So in Newcastle, very large, globally, less so within the UK, one of the local universities. NHS, again, no profits, but 110 billion income from the government, and 1.4 million workers, and in theory, its market share is 100% in the UK in terms of free healthcare, but there are some private sector parts to it. ERM, big chip manufacturer, 400 million profits, 4,000 employees, mostly in the UK, and nearly every mobile phone company in the world, up until quite recently, they developed microchips for. So it was one of the crown jewels of UK production, which is potentially going to get sold to an American company. So things we're going to look at in the second part of the session, 2 ways in which businesses can grow. So specific key terms here about how a business can grow, and looking at whether horizontal integration will necessarily benefit shareholders. So we need to find out what integration is and what horizontal integration is. Types of growth we're going to look at are organic and inorganic, but then we're also going to look at types of integration, and we'll look at the benefits of growing through integration. Quick reminder, the homework is those 3 things: read up, write, and warm up. Last week we looked at business objectives, and we've just finished a little bit on that. Next week we'll be looking at demergers and costs and revenues. Okay, another quick little thing for you to think about. Use your whiteboards, write down some ideas, or write down some notes. Why might a business wish to be big? So what would make a business want to grow in size, and why might a business want to shrink or stay small? So just on the 2 sides of your whiteboard, or sheet of paper, and thinking about those small local businesses and also the big global businesses. Why would they want to be big? Why won't you want to be small or shrink? 30 seconds, just jot down some ideas. So if you can get out a sheet of paper, And just make a table. On the left-hand side, reasons why they want to be big. On the right-hand side, why they might want to be small. And we'll just add a few notes into your notebooks from this. So reasons why businesses might want to be big, you just take some notes down, but you can add things that I'm saying. Partly to reduce competition. And the purpose for reducing competition is to control the price in the market. So the bigger you grow and you force out smaller businesses, you are more able to raise your prices. And reduce your costs, linked in with profit maximization as well. And as you gain size, you gain bargaining power, you gain the ability to monopolize supply, and you can reduce your costs per unit. And you can reduce the risk of your business, so you're less likely to go out of business if you're a big business, and also secure the future. It could be a managerial objective. Some CEOs like to be CEOs of increasingly large businesses. It potentially gives you higher pay because you're controlling more. And some businesses can compete internationally. So you may saturate your domestic market. You've got 100% of the market. If you want to continue to grow, you can move into international markets and compete internationally. Benefits of being small or shrinking. You can be more responsive. You can respond to your customers more quickly. You can give them more accurately what they want. This allows you to kind of look at niche markets, which may allow you to charge an even higher price because you are providing a really specific product. As a startup, you might want to survive and just stay small to test out the market, to see what the market wants and respond to it. Being small might allow you to be more able to compete internationally. You might be able to move quicker into a different market or test out a market. It might also help you to avoid inefficiency or overtrading. So sometimes businesses grow too fast, they take on too much debt, and they become unsustainable. But also becoming a big business might slow you down, and you may start to lose productive efficiency. In terms of what is better, well, there's not a hard or a fast rule, but sometimes some of the benefits of big businesses are they employ a lot of people. So sometimes governments like bigger businesses because their employment in terms of increases in taxes, and also in terms of corporation tax, so income tax and corporation tax. Governments like them because they can benefit the balance of payments. So if you are a big business, you will bring profits back to that country. But also it can help with increasing the GDP of a country. They can use resources more efficiently, and they also tend to pay regular dividends. So a lot of people's pensions are linked to dividend payments, and not just share prices. Small businesses tend to create new jobs. So big businesses employ a lot of people, but the things that will get us out of a recession will be created mainly by smaller businesses increasing their jobs. They tend to be more innovative or inventive. So our new products tend to come from new businesses. And also they can gain a comparative advantage. So if you think across to your trade that you're doing through globalization, this can improve a country's comparative advantage as well by gaining a new business. Okay. Just some examples of huge businesses or huge employers globally. Biggest employer globally is the US Department for Defense, 3.2 million people employed there. Chinese People's Army, 2.3 million people. So beyond that, you've got Walmart in terms of the first large private organisation, McDonald's, 1.7 million, the Chinese National Petroleum Company, 1.7, State Grid of China, 1.6, and then there's our NHS, 1.4. So not as large population-wise as America or China, but in terms of large employers globally, the NHS is one of the largest. Okay, next little task I'm going to ask you to do is to go to your booklets and go to page 5. So at the top of page 5, it should say business growth 3.1.2, examples of inorganic and organic growth. What I'd like you to do is to go to that first part, what is organic growth, sorry, what was inorganic growth. Have a read of that, and then you have you've got a little box below that, and the box needs you to fill in your answers to the questions. So difference between a merger and a takeover, an equation that would highlight a guaranteed benefit of a takeover, matching some key terms to organic and inorganic, and then a question around which company you'd want to invest in. And if you can do that, I'll give you about 7 or 8 minutes to do that. And I'll put an extra question up on the board while you do that. And then you can think about the answers to those questions. So 10 minutes, I'll put an extra question on the board in a second. Have a read through that and fill that handout in as best you can. So the additional question, which do you think is more likely for a small business, organic or inorganic growth? I'll leave that on the board while you have a go at the other questions. Okay, students, so if we can come back to your business books, we're going to go through the answers to the organic and inorganic growth section. So just as a kind of a big picture link, we looked at the objectives last week of why would a business be in business, and we agreed that profit, growth, return on investment were all key things, that all private sector businesses are trying to make profits. They may not be able to, but that's their willingness to make profits. And we looked at the private sector versus the public sector, that businesses in the private sector make profits, businesses in the public sector might have different objectives. So there's an assumption here that profit is a good thing, and an assumption that to maximize profit, businesses might need to grow. So this first section really looks at the reasons why a business would want to grow and how they would grow. So one of the last activities we looked at was benefits of being big, benefits of being small. The how they grow is two key parts. So one is understanding the difference between organic and inorganic growth. And then another part is looking at different types of integration. So the little examples at the top there, the pictures, you have Amazon buying Twitch, you have Apple buying Beats, you've got Facebook buying Instagram, you have Walt Disney buying up Marvel Studios, SoftBank buying ARM or ARM, and Kraft buying up Cadbury's. So some interesting examples there, because some of those are huge businesses that bought smaller innovative businesses. But in terms of Kraft, when it bought up Cadbury's, Cadbury's was more profitable than Kraft. So sometimes size isn't necessarily the thing, but the combined businesses are all going to be bigger than the original businesses. So coming down to it, if you can just get your books open on this page, and we'll add some notes in here. So the definition of a merger, which is kind of linked into this first question, is just when two firms combine. Into one. Mergers and takeovers are quite similar. However, the key difference is that mergers are agreed, and a takeover happens when one business decides to buy out another. So this doesn't need to be agreed. And it tends to be that the firm that does the takeover will be the firm that is left at the end of it. So the kind of Cadbury's and their brands become part of Kraft. When mergers are agreed, sometimes you have combined names of companies. So when Nissan combined with Renault, it was called Renault Nissan, and both of the companies had interests in had an input into the running of the joint company. You sometimes also see the word hostile takeover. So this is when the current business doesn't want to be bought out, and they recommend their shareholders not to sell their shares. But when firms are PLCs, the firm cannot prevent another firm buying up all the shares. So that's the key difference between a merger and a takeover. The synergy benefits of inorganic growth are to do with the businesses combining and achieving economies of scale. So you don't necessarily need all of the departments, so you can get rid of possibly Cadbury's advertising department, and you just need one department for the two firms. In terms of matching these to organic and inorganic, inorganic uses retained profits. Sorry, organic uses retained profits, so an O next to that one. External sources of finance is inorganic, so going to the bank or selling more shares. Mergers and acquisitions, a takeover, is an example of inorganic growth. Inorganic growth is quick, because you are buying up a fully formed company. Organic growth is slow because you are having to gradually reinvest your profits and slowly increase your scale. Inorganic growth is high risk. Organic growth is low risk. Inorganic growth will increase the debt of the business. It has high returns in the short run in terms of inorganic growth, because you're buying a fully made company, and organic growth will have low returns in the short term. So until you gain scale, it will be harder for you to make profit. That also leads to some of the costs and benefits of organic and inorganic growth too. The maths challenge part. So looking at this, there's not a right or a wrong answer. There's a few different ways to look at it. So the question says, as a shareholder, which company would you want your company to take over? So just imagine this is company A, company B. You might be Unilever, and you're looking at food producers and thinking, who would you want to buy? So you have sales growth per annum. So this is how fast companies are growing. So this is rapid growth. That might be one thing you look at. So this company is growing very quickly. Company C and company A is growing very slowly. In terms of sales, again, company C looks very attractive because it has a large amount of sales. However, it's currently making a loss. So if you're looking at this firm, you are looking at possibly a revenue max strategy going forwards, and it does have a significant amount of debt. So it's grown rapidly, it's grown inorganically potentially because it's got debt. So there's potentially risks around that, but also potentially high reward. Company A has the lowest sales, but it does have the largest profit margin. So in terms of dividends and returns on investment, even though it's a smaller company, it's more profitable. It also has very little debt, so lower risk. So different ways of looking at companies in terms of sales, revenue, profits, and debt. If it was an exam question, so this is the exam question that was linked to the objectives of the lesson, which was explain 2 ways in which a business can grow. If that question does come up, the 2 ways that the examiner wants you to analyse this is to explain organic growth, and the way you explain organic growth is through that process of reinvesting retained profits. And you can give examples of firms like Subway that has done that and it's taken its own profits. It's highly likely that you'd get given a case study where one would be obviously organic and one would be obviously inorganic. And then the opposite, or the other point of view, in terms of the second way, would be inorganic. And there you would talk about external sources of finance, mergers and acquisitions, and examples like those ones at the top, perhaps Apple and Beats, or any of those that you're looking at there. So that would be how you would answer that question. Just add a few notes as we're going along to that as well. Okay, so the next section is around economic integration. And I'm going to give you a little bit of time to read through the economic integration part of this. What I'd like you to do, so you've got different types of economic integration. You've got horizontal integration, an example of Facebook and Instagram there. You have vertical integration, which is an example of the Premier Inn hotel chain in Whitbread, the brewery. You've got backward vertical integration with Netflix, and you've got conglomerate integration with Samsung and also Tata. The activity that you've got is filling in this table. So if you have a look at the table, you've got definitions, and there's one given for you there, which is same industry, same stage of production. The other definitions have the word industry and they have stage of production in there. And all I'd like you to do is to kind of initially put down what you think in terms of how you would define that type of integration. And then I'd like you to think about an advantage and a disadvantage for each type of integration. So if a business grows through horizontal integration, what's the benefit of that? But also what's the disadvantage of that? If you do this quickly,
you can kind of look ahead a little bit at demergers and have a little read of that, and we'll come to that a bit later. But if we just take about 6 or 7 minutes to read through that and to fill the table out that comes after it. So economic integration, read the section, go to the table, fill out as much of it as you can, and we'll go through it in about 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, so if you want to finish off whichever one you're doing, and we will go through those key definitions, advantages and disadvantages. If you can just make notes as we go along. Okay, so we'll do the definitions first, then we'll go through advantages and disadvantages. So horizontal integration is when firms in the same industry buy another firm at the same stage of production. So a manufacturer buying a manufacturer, Tesco buying Sainsbury's, Vodafone buying Three. So same industry, same stage of production, the same goods, they're kind of in the market. So what you effectively got here is you're buying your competitor. Vertical forwards is same industry. At the next stage of production, so within the supermarket market, Tesco buying one of its customers. Not a good example. Better to think of that example of Whitbread buying a hotel. So a brewery that sells alcoholic drinks buying a restaurant or a hotel group. Vertical backwards is same industry, but it's at the previous stage of production. So this would be Tesco buying one of its suppliers. So maybe buying a farm or buying a food producer like, say, Kellogg's. In terms of the last one, conglomerate, it's a different firm. It's going to put diff here, but you could write a different, and at any stage of production. So if you're buying a firm in a different industry, it doesn't matter if they're also a producer. So it could be that Tata Steel, that manufactures cars, buys a food manufacturer. It's a different industry, same stage of production, but it could also be that Tata buy a steel manufacturing plant, as well as a fridge, freezer, washing machine manufacturer. So different industries, any stage of production. In terms of the advantages, well, if you reduce the market share, you will very quickly be able to increase your profits. As you gain price control powers. A disadvantage of this type of integration is that you may be there may be government intervention to reduce monopoly power. So most markets internationally, especially within the EU, the UK and America, we all have anti-competitive parts of the government which investigate markets, competition and market authority in the UK, but we'll also look at that in a bit more detail in future. Also, you could gain diseconomies of scale. This isn't a topic that we've done, but that acronym stands for diseconomies of scale, and that might reduce your efficiency. So if you get too large within a market, you may reduce efficiency. In terms of a linked point for that is you may also gain economies of scale on this side. So you're a larger producer, and what that does is it reduces your costs, which also benefits you in terms of profit maximizing. So market share would increase your sales. It also would allow you, because you've got a greater market share, to increase your price whilst reducing your costs. So that all links together into that profit maximizing strategy. If you buy one of your customers, so vertical forwards integration, and what that allows you to do as a business is to control your product. And this would allow you to prevent discounting. So if you are a manufacturer of cars and you sell them to garages, then those garages can potentially discount and affect your product. But also you increase your profit margin as effectively you are bringing into your business the next stage of production. So if you take out a stage of production, you take out their profits and you make it part of your own profits. A downside of this is you may not have the expertise to be good in that market. So if you are a manufacturer, there's no guarantee you are going to be good at sales. You may also get cultural conflict. So the business, what that means is that just the businesses are run differently. You can be quite a supportive manufacturing plant, but people who do sales tend to have, let's say, sometimes less of a moralistic judgment about who they are selling to, and they may be good at sales, but they might not be the same type of people that you want in your organization. So you can create cultural conflict. In terms of buying an earlier stage of production, so again, you are buying your supplier, and by buying out your supplier, again, you are increasing your own profit margin. That does also, because their profit margin, it does guarantee you supply. So you can control your supply, and that in itself would reduce your costs. So you don't have to shop around or have a department that is involved in purchasing, because you're guaranteed that supply just becomes part of your operations. In terms of the downsides of that, once you are tied in, you have a lack of choice. And you can't then find a different supplier, and it may affect the quality of your product. So if you have multiple suppliers and the quality of one supplier goes down, you're able to switch supplier. Whereas in this case, you're stuck with your supplier that you've bought because they are now your company. And again, you also have that additional point of either a lack of expertise or a cultural conflict. So there's no guarantee that Nissan would be good at producing steel or managing a steel plant. So they may be affected by that. And if the quality of steel drops, then that impacts, and they don't have the ability or a very quick ability to change supplier. Different stage, any stage of production. The key reason for this is to reduce the risk of a business. So in business studies terms, this is sometimes called diversification. That's not an economic key term. It's a business key term, but if you do business, it'll make sense to you. And this is about reducing the risk of the overall business, because if you're in multiple markets, then it allows you to be more financially stable. Sometimes what it allows businesses to do is to enter growing markets and leave shrinking markets. So two good examples of this, Nokia, which still produce phones, but it's not the same company it used to be, but it was the most significant mobile phone producer in the 90s. And what it started off was as a Wellington boot company. Also, one of the world's largest advertising companies, WPP, started off making wire shopping baskets for supermarkets. So being a conglomerate reduces the risk because you're in many markets, but also allows you to continue growing as a business and leave markets that are shrinking without it damaging your business. In terms of the downsides, again, you can have cultural problems. You can have overtrading due to inorganic growth. So a company grows too rapidly, takes on too much debt, and this could lead to a bankruptcy of that business. So before you are able to take advantage of those different markets, you just financially become insecure and end up going out of business. Okay. So we've kind of come to a natural pause, and depending on the time that we've got to, I'm going to ask a few little key questions, and we might just introduce one last little activity before the end of the session. So what I'd like you to think about, just for a moment or two, is, and if you can get your whiteboards out to test yourself on this, think about the different topics that we have looked at today. So you've got, we looked at profit maximization as an exam question first. Then we looked at organic and inorganic growth. We've also looked at the principal agent problem, and we've also looked at different types of integration. So we'll work our way back through things just very quickly. So I'm going to ask you for three things: the definition of vertical integration, the advantages of horizontal integration, and let's say vertical backwards, and the disadvantages of conglomerate. So let's put your notes away initially for this activity, and just have a think for a minute about how you would define vertical. Put that down your whiteboard, how you would explain advantage of horizontal, and how you would explain a disadvantage of conglomerate. So just a quick minute or two to think about that. Okay, so remember the definitions always talk about industry and stage of production. So vertical backwards is same industry, just going to put SI, and previous stage of production. So SI, PSOP stands for same industry, previous stage of production. In terms of horizontal, the advantages, that was same industry, same stage of production. It was about reducing competition, increase in prices, reduction in costs due to economies of scale, and then an increase in the ability to profit maximize. And our conglomerate was the example where different firms at any stage of production in different industries combine. And the disadvantage here were cultural problems, and that comes under also diseconomies of scale. But we also mentioned overtrading due to significant amounts of debt. Okay. Organic and inorganic growth. So again, how would you explain, what kind of key terms would you write to explain how companies grow through organic growth and how companies grow through inorganic growth? So again, minute very quickly, wipe your whiteboards clean. And let's see what you remember about those two different types of growth. So put a line down the middle of your board, O on one side, I on the other. What do you remember about those different types of growth? 1 minute. Okay. So Organic growth, that was the one that was about retained profits. It was slower, tend to be long-term growth. It was about reinvestment. It was about, think about an internal source of finance, and it's growing the current company. In terms of inorganic growth, that was about external sources of finance. This was quick, and it involved a new company or companies combining, and that would lead to a much greater increase in profits in the short term. Okay. So this is what we looked at to start with. I explained 2 ways in which a business can grow. We assessed whether horizontal integration will necessarily benefit shareholders. We could look at that in terms of the increase in profits. That would give us one side, and then we can also look at the negatives of the intervention of the Competition and Markets Authority, and also any of the other negatives of horizontal integration around diseconomies of scale due to inefficiency, so communication or coordination problems there. We looked at big and small firms, why you want to be big and grow, why you want to maybe be small. So big linked to horizontal integration, reducing competition, reducing costs, linked to conglomerate integration, reducing risk, securing future, linked to business objectives, revenue maximizing, managers making bigger pay packets for themselves, and growth internationally. And then we looked at small, which kind of links a little bit to inorganic growth, so more responsive, niche markets, survival in the early part, so linked back to business objectives and the product life cycle, competing internationally if a small market, but also avoiding inefficiency, so avoiding some of the negatives of those integration models. We also looked at the principal agent problem, and we looked at the principal being the shareholder who hires the CEO to run the business, but that they both have a lack of compatibility of incentives and they're acting in their own self-interests. And this divorce of ownership causing a problem in that the conflict in those objectives means that managers may focus on revenue maximizing, whereas the shareholders would prefer them to focus on profit maximization, which would maximize their revenues. And we had a little look at an exam question where there was a model answer looking at discuss the extent to which profit maximization is the main objective of all businesses. And we said it is rational, and the reasons for that was because profit is the long-term objective. It allows growth, it allows dividends, and it allows reinvestment, which allows the business to grow further. And we said the negative, or the opposite point of view, would be that in the short term, another objective might be appropriate. And this one looked at survival in times of recession, and the reduction in the scale of operation to keep in business. The slightly better version of that example used Facebook to look at having high revenues initially, and in the short term having gained economies of scale, so surviving being more appropriate. And we used the specific key term definitions within that to explain that part. And the very start, we looked at some examples of objectives and a judgment based on what would be the most appropriate objective in those situations. There's one final thing I'm going to do, but I just want to remind you that the tasks for this week will be the same as the tasks for last week in terms of when they're coming. If you still have your Vespa forms to fill out and submit on Teams, but this week should look like this. So up to Friday, you're going to have your new knowledge check, multiple choice on Teams. You've got your next reading. If you are doing the reading in the booklet, you should be doing it on Teams so we can track it. But this week, if you take a photo of it and send it to me, at least I can see you've done it. Then up to Sunday will be your knowledge check 2, so another multiple choice quiz, and then the first real essay to do in your purple books. So you need to take your purple books home today and do that first example answer in your purple books. The other thing that we need to be thinking about this week is what your personal statement might look like on UCAS. So some of you have already started saying your personal statement, and we may want to kind of look at that from a subject point of view to think about what your vision is for next year. So the key thing for this week is to try and get into this habit. We need to get into this quite quickly. If you're having any issues, you need to get in touch with me to let me know about that. But the first part of the week is read up, second part of the week is write up, and the final part is warm up. So within that last section, you should be reading ahead in your business book, having a look at demergers and costs and revenues for the next lesson. Okay, just as a quick run through of the 2 knowledge checks. So the importance of these knowledge checks, like I said in the first lesson, are that you need to be managing your week and interleaving your studies to create some gaps, but to also refresh your knowledge, but not to do this all on the last day before you come back into the lesson. So the reason it's on Teams is I can see when you're doing it, and then we can figure out if you need some help and support with getting back into a good habit. So it doesn't have to be exactly the day, but roughly the week needs to go into thirds. I know 7 days don't go into thirds, but it's effectively doing something every 2 to 3 days during the week to make sure that you're staying up to date. So I'm going to go through the knowledge quiz here and just explain why certain answers are right, why certain answers are wrong, for your own awareness. But going forwards, we need to be getting into the habit of doing these little and often. So the first question, which the vast majority of us got right, what irrational behaviour does this refer to? Individuals assuming the majority must be correct. Therefore, even if you're wary of buying shares, everyone else thinks it is, so they must know something. This is herding, so following the herd. Information failures is when one party has more relevant information than another. Heuristics are rules of thumb or guesswork. So 80-20 rule, 60-40 rule, if you've ever heard people say those things, they're just made up. And habitual behaviour is when you are in routines or you are in a pattern of behaviour that means that you follow that even if it doesn't maximise your utility. And business objective, aiming to maximise revenue while lower its costs, was profit maximisation. And business objective, where the managers of the business try to increase the value of sales to the highest level and maximise their share price. The reason that it isn't sales maximisation is it says the value of sales. So within that key part of the answer there, the word value implies that it is a monetary value rather than a quantity value. So sales maximisation is quantity, revenue maximisation is value. Words which are missing from the definition. So this person did get it correct. Interdependence, they just didn't spell it correctly. Independent is an individual doing something regardless of what other people are doing. Interdependence is relying on other people either for decisions or for help or support of goods and services. So the word interdependence is the best word. Would have also accept connectedness, links or connections. The rational decision for consumers to make when facing when purchasing goods is to maximise utility. Welfare, I suppose, is a synonym for utility, but utility is the key definition from the case. Which order would the logical chain of reasoning be in to explain free trade as a benefit of globalisation? So the first thing that has to happen is division of labour. People have to be given specific roles or specific industries to divide up the economy. Specialisation is the next key part. So specialisation in lowest opportunity cost means that you then repeat that, perform that, do one thing over and over again. This creates a surplus of goods and services beyond domestic demand. Then those goods are traded in international markets, which allows the country to then purchase imports at lower prices. And then lastly, this increases the standard of living from greater consumption. So the division of labour and the production of goods has to come before the trade. And when the trade starts, then you can purchase imports. So you'll export, you'll import, and then you'll be able to consume, but the trade comes after the surplus of goods. So you have to create the surplus to be able to trade the surplus. Negatives of globalization in terms of a negative externality. So the initial stage is goods being transported. However, that creates external cost of production. So the first step is that the pollution is created. The reason it's created is because the price doesn't include the external cost. Then the price, because of that, is less than social optimum. And then because of the low price, this leads to consumption being greater than the social optimum. And the last step being the market failure. So there's a couple of ones to shift about there. What that's trying to highlight is that even if you have all of the parts of the logical chain of reasoning, there is a chain to that logical chain of reasoning. So the logical word is that there's a cause and effect of all those. And even if you can remember all the stages, to get to level 4 analysis, you need them in the right order. Money being sent back home would go into the income part of the balance of payments. Politicians said it was unfortunate would be positive. The politicians saying it's unfortunate is the judgment on something that looks, sorry, the word unfortunate implies a judgment, but the statistic there of nearly 9% is positive, it's a fact. Uber Eats and Deliveroo battling to gain market share. This would cause demand to shift inwards. They are substitutes, and effectively, if the price of your substitute goes down, your demand will shift inwards. If we look at the part 2, so it does have some of the same questions in there, but similar questions. So the first is a definition of information failure. Business objective where it lowers its price to reduce its scale of operation. That is incorrect, that answer. And the answer that the student has given is correct. So I'm not sure how that's happened, but sales maximization is an incorrect answer. Survival was the correct answer. Managers try to maximize the utility of their customers by providing higher quality goods, which don't create negative externalities, would be allocative efficiency. So this isn't about creating value for themselves. This is about looking after their customers and giving them a good service. Logical chain of reasoning this time are both perfect. Money being sent back, again, that was well done the second time. That was done incorrect the second time. And demand shifting inwards. So the additional 2 questions in the second part, which are the following examples of actions an economy would take if it was to sign a free trade agreement. The only one it wouldn't do is providing state aid for businesses. Also, the reason I chose that is that that's one of the things that we are trying to kind of not include in our free trade agreement with the EU. They want provision for not providing state aid, as it can reduce or it can create protectionism within the deal. So if you protect your industries, they are able to lower their prices, and then they could undercut competitors in other countries. But the first 4 are all examples of things that would be included in a free trade agreement. So interestingly, people are worried that a free trade agreement with the US might include some privatization of the NHS to allow American big pharmaceutical companies to compete more easily in the UK, and also deregulation of food standards to allow, again, lower standard foods which are cheaper in America to compete in the UK and effectively undercut the UK market, or potentially force our farmers to lower their standards to compete with the Americans. Defining globalization, most accurate word, interdependence. So it's in the, we got this one more accurate the second time round. Okay, students, so if we have a look at your homework around skills practice, if you get your skills book out, and we want you to go to page 3, and the first thing on this is the skills to gain the marks in the different assessment objectives. So looking down the middle section here, and if you can just make some notes as you go along or refine your own notes if you've already got most of this, what you will see in this column here in terms of the different annotations, these will link directly to the different AOs and the different skills. So if when I'm marking your work you see the letter K, that is knowledge. If you see a small a, that's application, AO2. If you see A1, A2, A3, A4, that is you working your way up through the different skill levels in terms of analysis, level 1 to 4. Lower level evaluation you will see as E1 and E2, and higher evaluation you will see as E3. So to gain EO1 marks in an essay, it's definitions for key terms, but also using key terms throughout. So using them in context in your essays, not necessarily having to define everything. One key definition would be a good start, but that doesn't mean that you need to define everything that you're going to utilise. In terms of application, well, partly this is giving examples. So examples from the case study, examples from data tables, but more importantly, it's applying it to the context of the case study. So if this is a specific country, you would talk about the economy of Brazil. If it's a specific business, you talk about that business. If it's a market, the UK energy market, then you would use that context throughout your answer. So it can be a specific example, a quote, a figure, a change in a graph, but importantly, it's using the context throughout, and context tends to be the higher level skill. In terms of analysis, so this is your logical chains of reasoning. It's the cause and effect of changes in the economy or in a market. So you're looking for words like this leads to, which causes, the next effect is, and words like this. In terms of evaluation of the other side, this is looking at it from a different point of view. So using words like however, on the other hand, but then again, it's just another logical chain of reasoning. It's just this logical chain of reasoning is the opposite of the previous chain of reasoning. So if you've looked at why indirect taxes reduce consumer spending, you'd have to look at another point of view where they don't have any impact. It doesn't have to always be increases and decreases. It can be a positive impact and no impact, or a negative impact and no impact, but you have to look at it from two different points of view. The evaluation level 3 is the questions where there are conclusions. So the questions where it is just level 1 and level 2 are assess and outline. When it comes to conclusions, apologies, examine. I'm thinking of the old exam board. When it comes to level 3 evaluation, the questions will be discuss or evaluate. So again, if you can just make some quick notes on those. Other feedback that you may see on my marking for you, TV is too vague. This means that you are on the right topic, but it's not rational, or the logical chain of reasoning doesn't link. You have points that don't come together. NAQ is not answering the question, so you have misunderstood what the examiner was wanting. IRR is irrelevant. So this is, you are bringing in something which is off topic. You may have turned this into a politics essay or an English essay or a history essay, but this has stopped becoming an economics essay. BOD is benefit of the doubt. So from time to time, I will give you a mark which is benefit of the doubt, which is you are close and close enough that you gain a mark. But it would be better if I didn't have to give you benefit of the doubt marks. ACC is accuracy. So you may see this on a graph, or you may see this in your logical chain of reasoning. That means that it's not the perfect answer. It's correct, but it's not the best answer. And a little arrow pointing up will mean that something is missing. So either a key term or the definition needs an extra word there. One really small thing that will lead to an improvement in your answer. Coming down, which of these definitions is the most accurate? So again, focusing on accuracy. The most accurate definition for an indirect tax is a tax on spending on goods and services. The one above that is just an example, it's not a definition. The one above that is not a tax on producers. It's a tax that the producers pay, but it's not a tax on producers. Don't define by saying what it's not. There's lots of things that aren't a tax on income. Bread is not a tax on income. A duty paid for consuming negative externalities is more to do with the purpose of some indirect taxes. So whereas some of those answers are incorrect, they're not accurate. Definition of a negative externalities is where the marginal social costs are higher than the marginal private costs. So this would be the most accurate definition. This one is muddled up. A negative on someone else in a market is too vague. It's correct, but it's just vague. It's not going to get as many marks as it could. Social costs are greater than social benefits is an incorrect definition. Where there are social costs of an activity isn't correct either. So utilising some of the key terms, but not in the correct way. Looking at the example answers. Okay, so if we come down here, you will see the first set of example answers, and you have government intervention is when the government changes the law and intervenes in the free market to correct a market failure. If we contrast that with the second answer, a government intervention is used to correct a market failure, which is the misallocation of resources due to the price mechanism. So here the definition is more accurate. It's got a greater focus on exam economic key terms. So it's a better definition, more accurate, more use of key terms. So if we go back to the little section here, there is lots of key terms in context in the better answer, but the other key thing is 100% accurate definition. Okay, the application. So again, the second answer, which is the better answer, is in context throughout. And by that I mean that it just applies to the situation in every part. So weaker answers tend to give a definition, then they tend to list lots of examples at that point, and then the analysis for and against doesn't really mention the market anymore, and the conclusion doesn't mention the market anymore. It just turns into pure economic theory. In terms of the logical chains of reasoning, so again, these are both really good answers. Second one's slightly better than the first. So if we look here, taxes are good as they can internalize the negative externalities of overconsumption of cigarettes. So there you do have a little bit of application to the market. And given some specific examples from the case study, tax is set equal to the external costs. That's a nice first step. So I'm going to put 1 next to that. Analysis level 1. Then the quantity demanded and supplied can be decreased to the socially efficient equilibrium. Still A1. We haven't said how that's being done. Increasing the tax decreases the demand for the good as the price increases. Yes, the price increases, but there's some key things missing from that. This means that there are people dying or getting cancer, which reduces the strain on the NHS. So the government can be spent elsewhere. I think what they mean by that is the government money can be spent elsewhere, such as on education. This increases people's living standards so they can live a healthier life. Now, just looking down under that analysis, you've got a very accurate graph there, and we've got a line that shows the tax being paid. However, we've got lots of points on the graph here. We've got price, we've got quantities, and none of those are used in the analysis. And it doesn't also show what the effect the tax has, or develop the effect the tax has on the market. So if we look down at the second question here, so the government increased the tax could reach the social optimal level of price and quantity demanded as seen in the graph. This is because the tax increases the cost of production. Right, now we've got a specific part which is going to take us up to level 2. Therefore, the supply of cigarettes decreases. So now we're looking at the effect on the market, and we're analysing that change there to the marginal propensity to consume plus tax. Little key thing missing from that, just to be 100% accurate, what that student should have written was a shift inwards instead of decreases. If it said shift inwards, there was an additional mark waiting for them there. So if we go back to what they've just written in terms of the referring to the graph, so again, we've got specific reference to this part of the graph. So this student picks up an extra mark there, increases the price of tobaccos to the social optimal level at PSO, another nice link back to the graph there, which reduces the quantity demanded to the social optimal level, therefore the externality is solved. Level 4 analysis. So the first example answer there did describe what was going on, but very weakly, whereas the better answer, so if it's level 1 and 2 analysis, yes, they draw the graph. Yes, they give a small logical chain of reasoning. And they might mention the market. However, the better answer, the one that got to level 4, used the graph. And by that, I mean they referred to key parts of the graph. They then went on and give a longer logical chain of reasoning, which was more accurate, and they answered the question. So they talked about how it would reduce the quantity demanded. The evaluation of the other side is effectively the same quality, just reversed, or just the opposite. So either the opposite in terms of it being ineffective, or the opposite in terms of it being a reduction when there is an increase. And then lastly, let's have a quick look at the judgments. So in the first question, however, there could be a government failure such as unintended consequences like black markets. The increase in the price of cigarettes could cause consumers to go to black markets to buy them cheaper. This could decrease tax revenue for the government and could also cause more harmful chemicals to be used in the black market cigarettes, as there would be no regulation. This could cause worse health issues and cause increased costs for the NHS. So this, whereas it does start with however, it is more of a conclusion than an opposite point. So this is actually more of an E3 point, because it's not just saying that this is ineffective. So it's not just the opposite point of view, it's saying that this is worse than what it was originally. So when you make a point about a government failure, you are automatically making a point about a judgment on whether or not a tax is effective. So this essay has actually missed out on a good comparative point, and it's going to jump to a conclusion. If we look at the second essay, so we've got a little section there which says to conclude. Well, that's kind of highlighting to the examiner. I'm going to make a conclusion here. The impact of government intervention in the cigarette market will be more effective through a combination of a tax on tobacco and subsidies. So while this question was around taxes, what the student offered was an alternative. So one way you can make a judgment is to look at an alternative policy. So whether it's fiscal policy as an alternative to monetary policy, or whether it's subsidies as an alternative to taxes. It depends upon, so that's again a key phrase that is used to tell an examiner that you are making a conclusion. So I have an opinion up here, I've made a judgment, but now I'm going to give you conditions under which my judgment takes place. Subsidising e-cigarettes will increase the supply of e-cigarettes by lowering the costs of production, and therefore there'll be more substitutes available for tobacco cigarettes. So again, this could have been developed a little bit further to get an A-star answer, but what it does have is a conclusion which offers an alternative, and then it justifies that alternative. So it justifies why it would be more effective than just a tax by itself. So the evaluation, or the better evaluation, has a judgment. It then goes on to justify that judgment. The best answers, and what that answer was missing, so this is kind of linked into this part, was using economic theory to justify. So there are other versions, and we'll go through these in class, where you can utilise another economic theory to contrast with the previous one and justify that. And in this case, if the student had used elasticity, price elasticity of demand to do that, that would have been the perfect answer. Just a little heads up then for next week's homework. We're going to skip that question because it's only 6 marks and isn't much of a homework, and we are going to jump onto the trends in world trade and the pattern of global trade. So what you have is a little case study there, which shows the difference between intra and inter-regional trade. So intra-regional being trade between nations in a region, and inter-regional being trade between countries globally. And what you can see is changes over time. So all countries and all areas are seeing increases in trade, and for some countries that is mostly global. So Europe, still 71% of its trade is outside the EU, or outside Europe geographically, and 29% is within Europe. If we go down, what you can see is changes in comparative advantage. So comparative advantage being trade at the lowest opportunity cost. So effectively what your country is specialised in trading, and you can see that some countries such as China have gained comparative advantages in many, and then some more developed countries like the UK has lost comparative advantages at the same time. The case study itself has some information about Germany. So you've got Germany's growth rate, you've got their current account on the balance of payments, you've got Germany's labour costs in relation to Italy and Spain, and then you've got a little case study here to talk about Germany being the largest national economy in Europe. It's fourth largest by GDP in the world and fifth by real GDP. Service sector significantly large, but also a significant secondary sector, much larger than the UK. Looking at its own specialisms in terms of wind turbines, solar powers, and exports accounting for a third of national output. So a third of their GDP is due to the export sector of the economy. Germany is an export-driven economy. German companies own 35% of the container ships worldwide. So the first question is the extent to which the theory of comparative advantage explains the pattern of global trade. So you've got some examples there of trade increasing over time. You've got more trade also globally for some regions and more trade locally for other regions. So you need to explain comparative advantage first and how that may explain those trade patterns. But then another reason for trade occurring, comparative advantage will be a free trade argument. The opposite to that is a protectionist argument. So how can protectionism lead to a trade pattern? So where trade goes. The second question, which is linked to the balance of payments and specifically the trade balance. So imports and exports. Well, X minus M, if I was to do that accurately. So if a country goes from a trade surplus from a trade deficit into a trade surplus, what are the benefits of that? As it's a discuss question. What are the costs? And as it is also a discuss question, a very quick judgment. What would that depend on? As it's a macroeconomic question, I expect you to use an aggregate demand and supply graph to explain the benefits and costs. So let's get practicing that again. And next Monday, in the support session, I will go through this essay in a little bit more detail with you. Okay.